Vikas, hi, good to have you with us. How have you been?
Thank you. I've been very well. I was wondering where you had disappeared.
No, I've been very much here and very active and agile and kicking, right? And building Asia Tech, right? What could have been more interesting?
I would have
Um,
expected nothing less.
Thank you, Vikas. Because this is an exciting session, right? And this is an important session. I think you've been one of those champions of investing in the startup ecosystem, right? I mean, you've been doing it ever since the IN came together, right? You've been one of the very early members of Indian Angel Network, right? And you've been the one who's really seen this ecosystem evolve. You've seen founders across sectors, and of course, you've had certain priority sectors, right? So, I mean, this is an interesting conversation because there's just so many aspects to it, right, which become important.
Indeed.
I think for many people who are going to be watching this, right, and I think my sense is by the end of it, we should, there should be many people who would possibly get motivated to be investing in startups, right? Something that you've been doing for the longest time. Thus, it becomes an
Yeah.
important session in that sense.
Well, I mean, I would just give an caveat that if people start getting excited to invest just because they heard somebody say, and then, I'm sure they should have other principal, reasons why they should get into angel investing, as you know.
I think we'll keep it at motivated, right? I think
Yeah.
excited, not excited. I think is completely their
Yeah, yeah,
prerogative.
yeah,
But because this becomes an important session. But before we do that, right, I'd love you to give us a quick background, right? Of a lot of stuff that you've been doing, right? A lot of mentorship that you've been doing. I think it'll be a great start for this conversation, and we move into the questions for the session. Post that.
yeah. Okay, so, I mean, whilst angel investment is about give or take about 10, 12 years old in India,
Right.
I would say. It was around before that too,
Sure.
but my career is about 37 years old. So obviously I've had a life before people start to call me an angel investor.
Right.
So the first half of my career actually was like a regular, you go to business school, you take up a job, you work for multinational companies, and I was a business executive working
Right.
principally in the consumer product space. So I
Interesting.
have worked in sales and marketing, then moved my way up to general management and country leadership, and then regional directorship role in large multinational companies. I worked for Britannia, for Pepsi, for Reckitt, for Allied to Mac. And halfway through my career, around the year 2001, I shifted tracks because when I came back to India, having spent a substantial innings overseas,
Hmm.
leading the regional role for Middle East, North Africa, India subcontinent, I was a little more eager to hunt for opportunities beyond the FMCG sector because
Interesting.
for those of us who were around in the mid-career stage at that time, the world was changing every week. This
Right.
was the dot-com era, the Y2K. India was opening up. Everybody was talking about India. So there were a lot of new industry sectors opening up, and they principally draw from the consumer product space because that's a very rich talent pool to bring people from. Whether it was telecom, media, health, insurance, auto,
Right.
So I started my second journey as I would say a CEO in a startup mode for a multinational company, setting
Interesting.
up the operations in India, which is actually a global company with head offices in Singapore and London called International SOS.
Interesting.
They were trying to set up their India operations for a large global 24 by 7 medical travel security emergency assistance for expats and travelers worldwide.
Oh,
It was a B2B business, but obviously the users were the employees
right.
of the companies who would subscribe to their services, expats or travelers, right? So, which meant that if you were subscribing to the services, 24 hours anywhere in the world, you can get on one phone call an emergency help at your doorstep.
Right.
So this was actually my third startup as a professional executive. My first startup was that when I joined Pepsi in India in '89, I was the sixth guy to join the team. So I was the junior most guy in a large hotel suite, sitting in the room taking notes for every meeting and doing follow-ups.
Right.
But in the meantime, picking up how senior management thinks and operates in a very, very dynamic, fast-moving organization. So therefore, I picked up a lot, right?
Right.
So that was actually technically my first startup.
Interesting.
And I mean, my second startup role as an executive was that, when in 1994 India was opening up, one of the most exciting things that happened in that year was that all the international drinks companies came into India at the same time.
Right.
All the Scotch whiskies and liqueurs and so on and so forth. So I had the opportunity of heading one of them.
Interesting.
And it was a break which was fortuitous. I was very young, I was 33 years old, but somehow I found myself leading the operations of a large multinational company, launching Teacher's Scotch whiskey in India. Right.
Right.
That was a huge success. I spent 2 years and then I moved with them overseas for 5 years. So
Interesting.
these first two roles, I mean, although I did not know that the word startup had not yet been
Right.
born, but I was kind of, in some karmic way, being prepared for a startup life later on, which I knew awaited me. So that, and then International SOS was my third startup as a CEO of a large company, which I set up, I built up, I scaled, I ran for about 8 years. And then there was a particular opportunity in the healthcare services sector,
Right.
which that International SOS was not prepared to address because they perceived it to be too risky for them.
Right.
You see, a large international company has to very cautiously offer emergency medical services because there are also issues of liability
Right.
and other medical sort of, responsibilities because your clients are sitting in US and Europe. Your contractual obligations are subject to those jurisdictions.
Right.
So if you promise up to do something, then you have to actually do it. But
Right.
because your business was third party dependent, hospitals, ambulances, blood banks, pharmacies, air evacuations, aircraft carriers, so on and so forth. So therefore, as you moved deeper into the developing world, the risk that you would carry of any intervention was very high.
Right.
So they were prepared to go up to a point and not beyond. There was an interesting opportunity at that point opening up, which was that, large international companies executing complex projects in remote parts of India need emergency medical service help wherever their projects were.
Right.
So it's oil and gas, mining, construction, EPC. These people are setting up the operations, in the middle of Jharkhand, Bihar, Rajasthan, Andhra. And where do you find oil and gas or coal or
Right.
build a power plant? You are in remote locations, right? Where the medical infrastructure to support any emergency need that they might have is missing.
Right.
Because these are large international companies, they take their health and safety regulations very, very seriously. One, because they have this corporate duty of care, which they
Right.
take seriously. And second, they have very, very strong underlying obligations to the insurance companies that when they engage in any activity, they would ensure that they have made enough investments
Right.
to principally eliminate all the risks that they can identify. And the risks that they can identify but can't manage, that's when the insurance comes in and they have to cover through. So I set up an operation in India, which was providing emergency medical assistance services to these large international companies operating in remote locations in India, which
Wow.
meant that, it was a combination of advisory and consultancy work. First of all, making them aware what
Right.
is the risk of you operating for 18 months in the middle of Jharkhand,
Right.
setting up a refinery or
Right.
aluminium plant, or what is their risk that if you are doing drilling for oil in the northeast or offshore the coast of Andhra or Mumbai, and what can go wrong,
Right.
are the medical services that they can fall back on, and what they must have on site and what they must rely on someone else to coordinate and help them.
Right.
So I immediately gained huge success in that business because I knew the space, I knew the gap, I knew the solution, and my principal company was not prepared to address that risk.
Right.
I, as an individual, could do it. And that's the first lesson that I learned, that the entrepreneur is hungry and has a higher appetite for risk. He
Right.
is nimble, he can move fast, he is flexible, he can motivate, and therefore, if you have all those, if you have the ability of citing them all on one sheet of paper, right? You can see all the moving parts on one sheet of paper. You can connect the dots and you can sort of define the risk much better than anyone else. If you have defined and understood the risk, only then can you start the process of mitigating it or dealing with it, right? So when I undertook this project of my own, it took off, because I knew exactly who were the customers who were
Right.
suffering, with this gap and pain. Now, a strange thing happened actually with me in life, and there were two lessons which I'll talk about. Within 6 months of me launching my venture, which was quite successful, But I had been in this space as a corporate executive for
Right.
9 years. So I had extensive network and reputation in the market for emergency medical services. Remember, that was a time when outside of the government domain, this did not exist.
Right.
And because the government services themselves were very, very suboptimal, so there's a huge demand for these services.
Right.
So I was pretty well known amongst all the subject matter experts, but among the cluster where I was rather very well known was all the expat community and all the embassies because they were my clients, right? So 6 months into my launching my own venture, First India Assistance, the name you may be familiar with, I was approached, rather, my name was forwarded to the world's largest ambulance service company out of Denmark called Falk, because they were scouting for business opportunity in India. This is 2009.
Right.
So they are a very large, old, trusted company out of
Interesting.
Denmark. It's a
Right.
100-year-old company. They've been doing this for decades. And they felt that they knew this business very well. They had matured, they had capital. The time had come for them to try and see if they could establish their services outside of their domain, which was mainly Europe,
Right.
principally North Europe. So they were looking for a business partner in India. They met some very large players as potential
Right.
partners, but somehow they chose me to be their partner at the end.
Interesting.
And they told me, look, we don't want a very large corporate to become our partner. We
Right.
want to have somebody who is like us, patient, who can try a few things. And at a low cost, we will be able to discover what is the right way forward in the country. So within 6 months, I could not say no to the world's largest ambulance service company coming and making me their business partner and India operations head, except that their focus was that they wanted to run ambulance services,
Right.
service provider, right? And that was their core competence. Of course, there were other emergency services, including fire brigade and so on and so forth. But in India, they felt that is where the opportunity was.
Mhm.
Now, in India, primarily the opportunity was with state governments launching ambulance operations. So therefore, through public tenders. And I cautioned them that, look, in India, trying to engage with the government on public tenders is not for the faint-hearted. The process is very, very complex.
Right.
The procurement is very, very opaque. And it is not that the best technical partner gets chosen. There
Right.
are many extraneous considerations, some of which will require engaging in business practices that you and I will never countenance doing. So therefore, the probability of us securing these large, juicy contracts does not exist because the
Of
gap between.
complexities. Yeah.
So it's. But they said, okay, we are patient people. We understand this. We do know that it could take a few years to get in, but we also know that this is a business where once you get in, then you are sort of a utility partner.
Right.
Bari power plant ban gaya शहर के बाहर अब ban gaya na.
Right.
Okay. So once you have built an ambulance business with your fleet and everything else, and well, if you do a good job, nobody else can step in and you remain there for the rest of your life.
Right.
So therefore, consider this cost and effort and investment of a few years in the beginning towards building a long-term business, right?
Right.
But I guess India has, its own way of defining long-term investment and business opportunity. We tried very, very, very hard, but we did not succeed in securing any large contract,
Right.
primarily because we were not prepared to do things that are required for you to succeed anyway. So this process took us 5 years. In the meantime, the business that I was running, this medical services in remote location, kept growing, kept well. They took the business model,
Right.
took it to Africa, into China. They were very thankful that I had opened their eyes to a new, line of business, which
Sure.
they could easily do because they got all the ingredients lying in the company, but they never
Right.
had imagined that this can also be combined as a great professional service.
Right.
So I ran this operation, having set it up for 5 years in 2014, where was the first bridge of our agreement came, wherein we had the choice of continuing or putting or calling our shares, for sale.
Okay.
And having done this for 5 years, by that time I had sensed that there are many other opportunities that I could address myself. So 2014 is then when I exited from this venture, and then I became a full-time angel investor. So I
Interesting.
was investing since 2009 and 10 actually, right? But from 2014 end, I became a full-time investor, and that's sort of the basic stage where I am in,
Super.
where I could be more immersive, more serious, more hands-on, and build my own thesis of what angel investment is all about.
I think that's phenomenal experience, right? And I think it's not experience which is at a certain level. I think there's a lot of executional intelligence which is which you sort of bring to the fore, right? I mean, I've had the opportunity of knowing you, Vikas, right? And we've had multiple opportunities of interacting, right? I've always appreciated the depth and the intensity that you've evaluated businesses with, right? And I think there are a lot of those finer nuances that you've been able to understand much better vis-a-vis a lot of other people in the room, right? And nothing in a wrong way. It's just that I think now I get a background, right, to why you did that and how could you do that, right? And so beautifully. Because I'm going to move into to understanding your thesis better, right? Now I mean, you've been somebody who's been focused on healthcare, right? Across at least our interactions, I have known you for somebody who's been extremely passionate about healthcare delivery, right? And that's been your core forte, right? So I think all deals that came into healthcare as a sector were essentially channelized to you, right, for
That's right.
your expert views,
Right. Right.
right?
They still
But
do.
that's not what limits. It's not limited to healthcare only, right? I mean,
Right.
you've been an executive par excellence beyond healthcare, right? Some of what you kind of highlighted in the process, right? What are the sectors that you are excited about? I'd love to understand a little more about that and your portfolio where it stands today. You somebody who's hands-on, you somebody who's very active in the circuit. I'd love to understand these two aspects from you, and your involvement across these companies.
So, you're right. Healthcare services is something that, for some reason, gets marked to me whenever any deal comes in, not just from IM, but any platform, any forum.
Right.
And I keep reminding people that it's healthcare services, because
Right.
healthcare is a very, very large topic. If
Right.
somebody is engaged in setting up a multi-specialty tertiary care hospital, don't come to me because I will not be able to guide you, right?
Right.
If having built that hospital, now you feel what should be a strategy of creating a suite of services
Right.
beyond operations and doctors' practices, then maybe I can come in and I can give them some advice, right? Now, and that is where the first complexity of healthcare is. One, that it's a very diverse, large subject in terms
Right.
of the types of services you can render while still being within healthcare. And
Mhm.
the definition keeps on expanding. People will call aromatherapy also healthcare. And people will talk about, tertiary care operations of a terminal cancer patient, also healthcare, everything in between, right? See, the success rate of
Mhm.
healthcare beyond this transactional services that I run a hospital, I'm a doctor, you're a patient, you're
Right.
sick, I'll charge you consultation fee to be able to treat you better. I will get you to get a few tests done. And if there's something wrong, then I will have further intervention.
Right.
That piece is fairly well formatted.
Mhm.
That piece has got its commercial structure well in place. And that's the piece which has been growing largely over the last 25, 30 years
Right.
in India, right?
Mhm.
The other pieces of the healthcare ecosystem, where a lot of entrepreneurs want to create services and solutions, end up realizing very, very quickly that actually it is the big mothership of these large tertiary care hospitals which provide the gravitational pull for services which will be successfully monetized. And
Right.
if you're somehow not feeding into that system, then your revenue model is going to be very, very difficult to create and justify.
Right.
The reason for that is if you look at emergency medical services, if you look at primary healthcare services, if you look at wellness and preventive care services, all these services are usually provided in any successful country as an entitlement by the
Absolutely.
state.
Right.
So, therefore, it is not provided as a commercial activity. But if the state is not providing it,
Mhm.
then private enterprise will enter because there is
Right.
a need,
Sure.
right? So therefore, people are ending up trying to devise a service as a commercial service because the principal actor is failing in his or her duty in providing so, right?
Right.
So people don't set up private police stations, you know, or
Right.
private courts, but it is somewhat in the similar genre,
Right.
right? Now, when you try to create a business built on primary healthcare services or preventive healthcare services or emergency healthcare services, you realize that the transactionality does not create enough heft for a business to be built on unit economics
Right.
that you can scale because there's nothing distinctive. What will an entrepreneur do if once having referred you to a doctor treats the patient, your story is over.
Right.
Now maximum what you can do is you can try and get a referral fee from the doctor.
Hmm.
That's one time.
Right.
Because if I see the doctor, if I like him, I will not go through your platform. I'll go straight to the doctor,
Absolutely.
right? And if the doctor tell me this is what you need to eat, take, not take, the loop is closed,
Right.
right? So therefore, the room is very, very limited for these healthcare services.
Hmm.
Where there is a lot of opportunity, is that things like home care services,
Right.
right? Now, in developed countries, home healthcare services naturally start at a point where if I need a home healthcare service, I have no alternatives.
Right.
I'll have to engage a professional service of
Hmm.
a professional health, caregiver,
Right.
right? Who is a certified, accredited, trained person, right?
Hmm.
Who, if I look into my insurance plan somewhere, will be providing for me to engage those services for home health care, and insurance will pay for it.
Right.
So therefore, it's very organized and structured. I need home health care. Here's a person, he's trained, he's certified, he knows exactly what to do. We will come with the right protocol, equipment, bedside manners, we'll provide the full service, and he will come from a large organization which will have a contract and responsibility and accountability, and therefore it's structured. I will get into it.
Sure.
Now, in India, there are very easy, even if they are suboptimal, you know, alternatives available because 80% of home healthcare is you need someone just to nurse you, just to
Assistance.
make sure, assistance and caregiving,
Yeah.
which you can find within the household,
Right.
which you can find with an extended helper. So therefore, when people get excited about some of these businesses that are very large in
Right.
developed countries try to replicate, they don't do enough reality check when they come into India,
Hmm.
and they start and jump before they realize what are the business realities here, and they fail.
Right.
The other area which is very opportune is medical devices, right? Now, India should be the ground zero for two services.
Right.
One is, you know, frugal medical devices through
Right.
innovation.
Hmm.
Why? Because the only way we are going to be able to address our disease burden
Right.
is if we are able to devise healthcare devices which are cheap, frugal, sturdy, can work away from home and base so that in remote villages people on the move, etc., etc.
Absolutely. Right.
Right now, therefore there's a big opportunity. For instance, even GE, when they set up their Jack E. Welch, innovation center in Bangalore, one of
Right.
the first one outside of the US,
Hmm.
their principal focus was on medical device innovation. Even
Right.
they, as a big corporate entity, realized that that's an opportunity. India is where we can do this.
Hmm.
And there is the ecosystem in India is there. We can just about get you started. So
Right.
people like BIRAC and DBT and all these places, they are very good, but within limitations, they can give you that first check of a grant. They can kind of tick the first box for you. So
Right.
if you are a bioengineer, or if you are a doctor who has passion for medical devices, or a pure engineer who feels that medtech is the way to go, a lot of people, talent enters.
Right.
They're very talented. They identify the gap and the opportunity for devices very, very quickly because there are so many and there's such a large problem that they
Right.
face. They're able to create the first prototype very well,
Hmm.
the first working prototype very well, and then they get their first grant very well.
Right.
They may get the second grant also very well. They may also get an early stage check from one of the networks like Indian Angel Network, blah blah blah.
Right.
But after that, there's a precipitous fall.
Hmm.
Because after that, then you now need to take a big leap to be able to now make this device, which is properly with the right ergonomics, right aesthetics,
Right.
right price, and the features, the right approvals. And because the system for this in India is still rudimentary,
Right.
right? You end up having to rely on third party players overseas,
Right.
right? And you realize that if this device, which if it has to become successful, I have to sell lakhs and lakhs of pieces for which India lacks the capacity,
Right.
right? And the only devices that gets the first level of traction is if somehow you're able to supply this to a government, a state government, which says every healthcare center should have this respirator,
Right.
every healthcare center should have this meter.
Right.
After that, there is very little traction.
Right.
Then you say, okay, maybe I should look for markets overseas.
Mm-hmm.
That's another journey. You need EC mark approval, FDA approval, rigorous approvals. You need clinical trials and pricing. So the money that you need from your angel to Series A is the valley of death
Right.
because somebody has to write a check for at least a few $1 million,
Right.
right? Not knowing what could happen to this
Mm-hmm.
money. Now, if you are sitting somewhere in Europe or the US, there are these very, very highly subject, function, sector focused VCs who say we only invest in medical tech.
Interesting.
And they would be maybe attached to some university,
Right.
some research company with pharma background, or successful health tech entrepreneurs who are passionate about this, who are prepared to support, and they're prepared to cut a check out to $3 billion because this is what it takes,
Right.
right? But the failure rate can be extremely high because the rigor that is required for you to succeed in creating a genuine breakthrough innovation in a medical device, it requires you will fail at some stage or the other because
Absolutely.
there's just so many people who
Right.
are in it, and you realize therefore the success rate is very, very small, right?
Interesting.
But for the people who succeed, the take is very, very high,
Right.
right? And that value gets only unlocked if you get your first level traction in a developed country market, where they have similar innovations coming in from Korea, Taiwan, China, Israel, plus their own home country, etc.,
Right.
etc. So somewhere in that traffic, in that noise, in that bheed bada, our Indian entrepreneurs lose out.
Interesting.
Because they, even if they were to succeed, the first condition is, hey, listen, I want you to flip your company to the US or Europe.
Right.
I want your IP to move, and I want all angels to exit at a heavy discount.
Mm-hmm.
Because unlike other sectors, you may have 3, 4 VCs who
Right.
could be prepared to enter into serious discussion, and 2 or 3 might even give you a term sheet.
Mm-hmm.
Here, there are barely 2, 3 people who will show serious interest in you. And if you are fortunate, one guy will say, okay, I'm prepared to sign a term sheet that he holds all the negotiation power.
Interesting.
If he wants to then exit all the angels at a deep discount as a primary condition, then it might happen. But the angels get deterred from entering the second such bet because चलो यहाँ तो जान छूटी मिल गए पैसे. Next
Right.
time नहीं हो तो क्या करेंगे? So
Interesting.
therefore, the interest and the appetite for angels to support these ventures kind of wanes over time.
Interesting.
The reason being because post the angel and Series A round, there's such a gap in India that the entrepreneurs will make a leap to overseas, and not many can do that.
Right. But you guys tell me this, right? I mean, COVID has been unreal, right? COVID just opened up all the crevices and and every inefficiency that existed in the healthcare ecosystem, right? I mean, it's been a revelation of sorts, right? I mean, I think each one of us very casually, approached healthcare, right? I mean, it was not something that we were dealing with day in day out, right? Unless there was a hospitalization, in the family, or there was some unfortunate event that would have happened, right? This last 1.5 years has completely changed how we looked at healthcare. I think the seriousness is different. The way people, of example, preventive, for example, has gone through the roof. People are consuming, right? People are reading a lot more. Information, quality information is being paid for, right? So there's this huge change on the consumer side of it, right? Uh, has this put, some pressure? Has this changed how we looked at healthcare, right? Are more people opening up? Because I talk to many, many investors, right? There's a different and a renewed sensitivity and a seriousness around healthcare, right? Of course, what you're highlighting is a very different kind of a depth. Not a lot of people understand the depth, right? But there is definitive seriousness which is around healthcare, right? I've been talking to a couple of people who've been wanting to set up or in the process of setting up focused healthcare funds, right? Do you think that has changed? What's your sense of it? I mean, you're a very active person when it comes to the industry, right? And various forums and forums, right? What's your sense of it? has this changed? Are we where we were, possibly in a very in a latent position when it came to doing anything per se in healthcare, from that to a very active and an agile environment where we are ready to fund. Also, there's a lot of new capital which has come in, right? Where there is, people want to invest in healthcare. What's your sense of it? What do you make out of in a post-COVID environment of the sector?
No, so Anshu, you're right. I mean, healthcare is obviously being seen in a new light
Hmm.
post-COVID. There's no question.
Right.
It is one of the sectors which has got spotlighted
Hmm.
for the gaps, as you said, crevices and the problems that they have, which is another word for opportunity.
Right.
Right? But there are a few things I'd like to just kind of highlight here.
Sure.
You know, when you say that 85% of our engineers who
Hmm.
come out of colleges are unemployable,
Right.
when you feel that, what does it take to fix it? It takes a very, very long-term intervention to
Interesting.
make sure that the batches that will start coming up are employable. And
Hmm.
if you act in all earnestness today, then the outcome maybe start becoming visible in about 7, 8, 10 years from now.
Right.
Right. So I think healthcare if is similar. I'm just taking this very facetious example.
Sure.
So of course, COVID has exposed all the shortcomings in our healthcare system,
Hmm.
right? Which, as you also said, were latent, were known, were felt, but they
Right.
were not pinching you.
Right.
COVID has kind of pinched everybody,
Hmm.
right? Now, what has happened during COVID is that the here and now of what we need has certainly been felt very, 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 very strongly.
Right.
One sector, I think, where COVID has really opened our eyes is that, you know, beyond just making generic pharma products
Right.
and becoming a factory to the world, which in itself is a huge industry, has done very well. The story is equally impressive to the IT story,
Right.
which and it gets talked about a lot more. The pharma is as big, right?
Right.
Because India is a pharmacy to the world.
Right.
I think one of the very, very good things that has come up is that one, we still excessively depend on China, among
Hmm.
other countries, for the active ingredients,
Right.
right? So therefore, that is easy to fix, which was not being done thus far
Right.
because lazy, it was cheaper to import than for someone to put up a plant, try to compete with China, and then still not be able to compete versus a strategic focus saying, hang on,
Right.
we can't have a dependency on such a critical raw material for pharma sector on a third country. So I think that's one sector which has become very opportune.
Right.
Second is the other sector which I wanted to talk about, and I'll look back in and then come to answer your
Sure.
question, is where India should be ground zero
Hmm.
is pharma research and R&D,
Right.
because we have all the talent in the world, right? We have a lot of, biochemical scientists in the world.
Hmm.
We have a very, very good cohort of professors, academics, doctors who are very committed to do research
Right.
into new molecules, new drugs, drug discovery. One, it is cheaper.
Hmm.
Okay. Second, the regulations are still relatively soft.
Right.
Third, there's very easy access to patients to conduct trials.
Right.
Fourth, a lot of hospitals are willing to partner with you because they have so many untreated patients who they can't help,
Right.
and they feel might as well partner with a credible body of scientists who
Right.
maybe have a new solutions work in progress that we can make them discover and
Hmm.
make it big for tomorrow. They have a same problem like medtech devices after initial breakthrough,
Right.
same problem, and then the story is very similar, and that's where the story is stuck. That after the angel investment, Series A doesn't come, someone needs to write a big check. Those guys aren't here. Those
Right.
guys are sitting overseas. It's hard for them to see us to see them, and therefore a lot of things are lost, and etc. etc. Now,
Right.
to specifically to come back to COVID, I think fundamentally the role of technology has been understood as being real in healthcare services,
Hmm.
right? Before COVID, it was easy for people to dismiss. And
Right.
I would also say the medical community was also playing a subtle but a powerful role in it,
Hmm.
saying, how can I treat a patient if I've not seen the patient?
Right.
Right? Consultation must be in person. I
Interesting.
must look at the tests and the reports, etc., etc. I'm a family physician. I've seen
Right.
your health for the last so many years, and I
Right.
can tell you by looking at your face, as to what health issues you can have because I have treated your uncle, dad, wife, sister, mother, which is true,
Right.
right? Which is absolutely true. But where is the capacity in India, you tell me, to ensure that there will be an availability of a good doctor in every neighborhood
Right.
who stays there for the 30 years and therefore is very, very familiar with all the health challenges of that community? Because primary healthcare is about practicing in a community,
Right.
building trust, and being able to treat people because you know them, so therefore, if you can't engage that many bodies and doctors over
Right.
time, then it'll remain unaddressed because you don't have the capacity, the doctor. So therefore, technology. Now, in COVID, because people were forced to take to online,
Right.
forced to take to consultation with doctors online, the doctors have also realized it works.
Hmm.
Right? That's a fundamental paradigm change that the medical professionals themselves have realized that it works.
Right.
Technology enables, is more productive, and in fact, it's super fast. And I, as a doctor, do not necessarily have to run to three different medical establishments in a
Right.
week to make a living. I can actually do all of that, but I can also do a lot by
Right.
using technology. Right now, see, supply only follows demand.
Right.
If there is no demand, supply will stall, right? If the demand is saying pulling, moving fast, supply will respond. So
Right.
now, if the doctors, medical practitioners, and everybody else, from wellness to primary care to secondary care to specialists to people looking at your reports, are being able to give you proper medical consultation advice. You see,
Hmm.
there is a distinction that you make in the medical services business. One is called that you are giving a medical opinion,
Right.
right? Which is what it used to be. Hey, listen, I've just spoken to you over the phone. I've just maybe had a
Right.
video call with you. I've looked at a report. I can at best express an opinion.
Right.
I can give you medical advice,
Hmm.
but it's not consultation.
Right.
But now doctors are very, very comfortable saying that I have had a chat with you
Right.
on video. I've looked at your reports and I've looked at all your tests, and I'm quite confident that what I'm telling you amounts to consultation.
Right.
So if medical consultations can be accepted both by the patient and the doctor and
Hmm.
the medical legal fraternity as online and video based, then it opens a whole new world of possibilities.
Interesting. Interesting.
So which means primary to secondary care consultations can be done
Hmm.
by using all the technology tools, and that not just where it stops,
Right.
also because as data science is entering medicine. See,
Hmm.
data science had thus far only been used in processing insurance claims,
Right.
in determining whether this insurance claim is payable or not,
Right.
in a lot of drug efficacy,
Hmm.
in a lot of patient records and moving of electronic health records, and so on and so forth. But now the technology is moving the data science into the domain
Right.
where the machine can tell you, having looked at these 2 lakh, patient with similar medical condition, I think I'm ready to be able to, on the basis of an algorithm, give you a few suggestions of what it would be.
Right.
Having 5 lakh radiology reports of the chest, of the pancreas, of the lungs, of this, of that spleen, so on the other, I think I'm now in a position to give you speedy and
Interesting.
accurate medical, suggestions. Now,
Right.
the machine is not the one who's giving you the final medical recommendation and the
Hmm.
prescription, but it is making the life of the doctors very,
Easy.
very easy. Now,
Right.
the final thing which has happened is till about 3, 4 years ago, doctors thought that this is going to put us out of business and job.
Right.
right? That if the patient can go and talk to some doctor who or some algorithm who upload the reports and get something and then ask Google and go, then what am I going to do?
Right.
But I think now the understanding that is developing is the doctors see that
Mm-hmm.
this is actually a very good medical tool and a very good medical aid on the basis of which I can take fast and accurate decision. It makes me more productive. I'll give
Right.
you a personal example. Just
Right.
last week, I went through my annual health checkup, right?
Mm-hmm.
Go through all the tests and everything else.
Right.
And a day after, all the medical reports are compiled, and then you go and see a doctor of internal medicine who then looks at all your reports and tells you the do's and don'ts, etc.
Mm-hmm.
etc. The last time when I got it done pre-COVID about 3 years ago, it was very, very painful because,
Yeah.
the doctor would sift through all your reports, see this, see that, and the whole consultation process would last 30 minutes,
Right.
even if there's nothing wrong with you, right?
Mm-hmm.
This time, last week, I went, the consultation did not go beyond 3 minutes,
Wow.
right? Now, the doctor had all the reports in his system. He is now used to looking at the reports on his system.
Right.
He was able to generate what I need to do for vitamin B, vitamin D, blah blah blah, and the other. And
Right.
within 3 minutes, I was done. Now,
Right.
one of the cultural things that people need to understand is
Mm-hmm.
usually if a
Right.
doctor just sees you for 3 minutes, you feel what उसने मुझे कुछ पूछा ही नहीं, you know, ये मेरे तो पैसे नहीं वसूल हुए because that's your cap you're wearing.
Right.
But because I come from the healthcare domain, I said, wow, he dispensed off me in 3 minutes.
Right.
What he would have taken 30 minutes doing in 3 minutes is great. He can see many more patients, right? So that's the kind of productivity, efficiency, accuracy, which
Right.
I think the technology is bringing to the doctor inside his clinic for the patient's benefit that I think is very useful. And that, it is silently working at the back end. It
Mm-hmm.
is going to improve productivity of all the healthcare establishments, all the doctors, medical staff, etc.,
Right.
etc. And therefore, you will see that we will be able to achieve a lot more with the
Right.
same medical infrastructure than we were able to 3 years ago, which would not have happened had it not been for COVID forcing to bring this all together.
Interesting. Because thank you for giving that out, right? I think this answer had a combination of a consumer, right, who's experiencing this change firsthand, right, and also somebody who understands healthcare much deeper and in a more meaningful way, right? Because I would love to talk to you about two particular models, right? One is of course the impact of insurance, right? Because I think the seriousness around insurance, right? We were a society where we thought, if you're going to buy insurance, you're possibly going to be contracting it, right? And that's literally the thought that we have, right? And that's something that, I mean, you talk to anybody in the insurance agent industry, right? And surprisingly, that's the biggest excuse that they come across, right? For the lack of penetration of insurance, right? And that's something which is changed completely. That's number one, which I would love to hear from you on, right? Uh, and what would that do to the overall healthcare industry, right? In terms of the quality of service and so forth. I mean, you've touched upon some of these aspects, right? But I think will we be getting to a level of being the quality of healthcare at a developed nation, right? At par with that. I think that's question number one. Question number two is we are seeing emergence of newer models, right? And these are models which have come up just a little bit before COVID, right? Where you know there are supermodels or super layers that are getting established where they don't necessarily own infrastructure. These are technology layers where a consumer is interacting with technology. The real estate required or the infrastructure required could be anywhere, right? Uh, Now, do you think these are models which will be able to deliver the quality which is required? Because irrespective of whatever comes in, whatever technology comes in, that doctor patient relationship is something which is very, very foundational, right? And that is something which has to be consistent. My relationship with a store nearby and the owner and promoter of that store is very different from a delivery boy who comes in and delivers certain things, right? uh, do you think that construct could change the way healthcare is getting delivered? It's going to get commoditized, it's going to get very, very professional with lack of empathy. And healthcare is something, as an industry, as a consumer, I want that comfort, right, with my doctor, with my all of that infrastructure, right? What do you make out of these two things? I'd love to hear from
So, Anshu, this is a very, very complex topic, right?
you. Right.
And it has got many nuances, many moving parts, and let me
Mm-hmm.
try and attempt to answer.
Sure.
And share my views on this, right? And they're mixed actually. You see, as you rightly said, with scale, you compromise on personalization,
Right.
right? And personalization is the foundation
Hmm.
of a doctor-patient relationships. And many doctors will tell you that half the time you will be okay
Hmm.
if the doctor tells you that you are okay with a smile, and that brings half the
Yeah.
confidence to you,
Right.
right? Now, if that goes missing and it is replaced by some technology enabled solution, which is trying to do on a best effort basis a good job
Right.
of what was otherwise a personalized environment, then you have to live with that,
Hmm.
right? Now, see, insurance is health insurance is a mixed bag,
Right.
right? Now, as the healthcare infrastructure becomes more and more complex,
Right.
it becomes more and more complex,
Hmm.
it becomes more and more expensive, and it becomes harder to sustain.
Hmm.
It therefore devours resources because the life expectancy is going up and people want to yet live longer and they can
Right.
afford to live longer because they have the means to get pull in the healthcare infrastructure to them first, then to the bottom of the pyramid.
Right.
Now, in a developing country like India, there is absolutely a lot of, how should I say, inequity in this,
Hmm.
right? Vast majority of people don't have access to primary care,
Right.
and people like us can afford to pay a lot of money just to get an executive health checkup,
Right.
every year, and then, of course, engage in other forms of treatment, right? Now, healthcare can, of course, insurance can, of course, at the bottom of the pyramid, do a very good job of transferring the risk
Hmm.
of the healthcare cost burden
Right.
to someone else through aggregating the risk,
Hmm.
right? But as you move up the value chain, it tends to promote inflation in the healthcare premium, and therefore that in itself becomes a risk.
Right.
Let me explain to you, right? Now, if the tertiary care hospitals are going to be owned by private enterprise ownership structure,
Right.
then willy-nilly, give or take 5, 10, 15, 20 years, they will become more and more commercial savvy and focused in being, business-like in their approach.
Right.
They have a hospital, they have assets, they have people, they have costs. Those must be covered. They must be get preferred treatment. They must be better than the other hospital. They must have a brand. Brand means trust. Trust is important. So therefore, the investment that goes into sustaining that infrastructure
Hmm.
adds to the basic cost of treatment.
Right.
What is required for basic medical intervention become just a part of the overall ecosystem that you build to get the right people that you can then treat,
Right.
right? Hospitals love people who come for elective care surgeries,
Hmm.
planned surgeries. They do not put them in the private care domain, I'm saying.
Right.
They don't want to have a large emergency center where
Hmm.
patients show up with medical conditions that require immediate intervention
Right.
without you even knowing if there are means to pay,
Hmm.
right? So, which is why if you will see all the large private hospitals across the country have increasingly smaller and smaller emergency rooms,
Right.
right? In fact, in some of the large hospitals, private hospitals in Bombay and increasingly Delhi, you will have to struggle to find where the emergency is if at all it is there.
Right.
But they have to have some, so they have one to tick box, right? Because so if hospitals over time sure can shrink from making themselves available as public institutions,
Right.
and anybody who has an accident or critical injury or a fall or a stroke can rush to the hospital, get the treatment, and then move up the treatment chain. If those doors start shutting up in the large hospitals, then there are very few government hospitals you go, which are always, as you will see,
Right.
congested and 5 people to a bed, which even COVID showed us.
Right.
So therefore, that aspect of healthcare Whereas the hospital in themselves will do increasingly better.
Right.
They will be very good for the investors. They'll be very good for people who serve in those establishments. But increasingly, the basic purpose and objective which they were set start to
Mhm.
get compromised. It's nobody's fault. That's the way it
Right.
evolves, right? My hospitals start to make calculations about, patient churn. So if
Right.
the patient in the first 3 days has given you 80% of the medical treatment potential, then on
Right.
the fourth day, you would rather have somebody else come in and this guy go out. And
Right.
then therefore you're always having patients for 3 days and no more, right?
Right.
So those are some of the distortions that will creep in,
Mhm.
which in a large developed country, which is excessively privatized, it can be accommodated, but
Right.
even there, it's becoming a bit of a challenge,
It
right?
is.
Yeah.
No doubt. Yeah.
As the treatment costs keep going up,
Mhm.
the insurance premium keeps going up,
Right.
right? Now, as insurance premium keeps going up, the insurance companies actually benefit
Mhm.
because, first of all, they are being able to cover the risk, which
Right.
for the first 15 years, healthcare insurance companies in India have carried the burden of loss ratios being in excess
Right.
of the benefit they have promised, only to wait for a day when they'll be able to cover. But then if the premium
Right.
costs reach a point where they go beyond the reach and the grasp of average middle class family, then there is a problem, right? Now, thankfully, in India, if it is done ethically, because the numbers are so large,
Mhm.
and insurance is again about spreading a risk over a large number of people.
Right.
Therefore, the cost per head is very, very low, right?
Mhm.
So, if the insurance penetration improves faster, then the insurance companies should be able to give the benefit to the people who are buying insurance simply because our numbers are so large
Right.
that the risk can easily be met. So
Mhm.
if 2% people are going to go for serious hospitalization in a pool of 100, you know then it is one sort of underwriting costs that you can justify.
Right.
But if the numbers become very big, and if 2% becomes 1.2% of 10,000 people, then the cost can become even lower, and
Right.
so on and so forth, right?
Right.
Now, so I think what India will need is a lot of health insurance plan clusters, a
Right.
basic indemnity product,
Mhm.
and the other product which can also cover things like home care and other diseases and so on and so forth, or
Right.
critical illnesses, and or access to the top hospital, to the best room. So I think if we develop this multi-tiered insurance tariff policy based insurance structure, then it'll be very good. And I think here it will not happen on its own.
Right.
You'll probably need some regulatory, you know, balance between the service providers and the regulators to be fair to each other,
Mhm.
so that you are able to ensure that even people at the basic bottom of the pyramid are being able to get a basic healthcare plan, an
Which is very important.
indemnity plan, which is important. And because the numbers are large, everybody can afford.
Right.
And people who have those lifestyle diseases, who go for elective care treatment, who go for expensive diagnostics every year only because they can afford to, and they want to go to large hospitals and stay in suites, etc., they're more than welcome. Then there has to be a way of ensuring that the total insurance premium across the strata,
Mhm.
and the hospitals are also sensitive of ensuring that the treatment to the people with basic illnesses is balanced. I think we will move forward on the right basis. If this balance and equilibrium is not attained, I tell you, there can be a big issue. Look, 16% of US GDP goes to healthcare.
Right.
Does it have the best patient outcomes in the world? Absolutely not.
Right.
There are countries who spend a fraction of that.
Mhm.
But because it is in the public service domain, Europe, the whole of Europe is largely, public funded.
Right.
They spend much less and they have better,
Mhm.
healthcare outcomes. And that you can see even in COVID.
Right.
So therefore, a balance has to be found, and
Hmm.
India has both the experiences.
Right.
So India has, got a lot to learn from
Hmm.
do's and don'ts and move forward. But if it excessively is controlled by private ownership structures in tertiary care hospitals, then I think it may just, disrupt the equilibrium that we need for our, healthcare ecosystem.
Interesting. Interesting. Because I want to move on to talk about Bharat, right? And I think, we've touched upon, certain stratas of society, which is also has a representation of Bharat, right? In a certain common way, right? But I think it's important to discuss that, in a specific way, right? I mean, as soon as you start talking of tier two and tier three, I mean, India is a large ship, right? We operate at multiple levels, multiple layers. We have a lot of cultural issues, right? For example, Central India is going to behave completely differently. Southern India is going to behave completely differently. Western has its own challenges. Eastern has its own challenge, right? So we're a large ship, right? We're a fairly complicated play, right? And 75-80% of India exists in these tier two cities and downwards, right? Now, a lot of what we're talking about is essentially very urban focused, right? In a sense and way. What do you think are the I mean, what needs to be done, right? I mean, as soon as you want to solve for tier two, right, where there is infrastructure which is coming up, but of course there is no transparency, there is inconsistency, right? There are a lot of those gaps, right? So, what are some of those challenges that you think are very critical and need to be tackled, right? And what are some of the opportunities that you think exist in tier two and tier three? I mean, of course, you've talked about the cost of healthcare, the cost of experimentation, India being a backyard, right? And then that can have a cumulative effect, right, in terms of across the costs that are there, right, across processes, surgeries that are offered, right? But if you were to look at Bharat, right, what should be the model to ensure that we get ready and fast, right? Because we are getting to a point where we are at the peak, right? Next couple of years, we will start a downward trend, right? I think healthcare is going to be the biggest area of concern, right? We have limited time in that sense. Tier two is not necessarily prepared. We are unfortunately also a country which is low capitalized, right? There are lesser taxpayers, right? That essentially means that the government will have to go on and fund a lot of these things, right? What's the optimal model for a tier two? Like it's fairly complex. I know. I mean, this is not going to be a session sufficient to answer that, right? But if you were to sort of answer this in say 2-3 minutes, right? What's the construct that you look at for solving for that problem?
So I think the UPI model,
Hmm.
using technology to enable payments,
Right,
and look at how quickly it's got traction,
right,
right? Subsidize it for
sure.
the vast number of people, but the system is able to justify that
Hmm.
because people at the top will also benefit and end up paying for it
Right.
anyway. Now, any healthcare system,
Hmm.
you know, first and foremost, the primary healthcare infrastructure must be strong and robust,
Right.
right? If the primary healthcare infrastructure is not robust, then people will not have access to primary care.
Hmm.
They will ignore their health. Something which could have been prevented, avoided, managed, mitigated will sort of continue to aggravate.
Right.
And every person will then end up having to go straight for an expensive treatment which he or she cannot afford.
Right.
Right. Now, therefore, the first and foremost challenge for India is to ensure that the primary access to primary healthcare is universal
Right.
and low cost.
Hmm.
And when we spoke earlier about the role of technology, the medical community accepting and being open to technology as an instrumentality for them to work efficiently and faster with more accurate outcomes and results. I think it is good to have application of technology in tertiary care hospitals and everything we else spoke about,
Right.
about radiology and this, that, the other, and drug efficacy and patient. But I think the primary place where technology, basic technology, should be at the primary care end of the pyramid,
Right.
right? We have spoken also that it is not going to be possible for us to have physical bodies of doctors and paramedical staff and nursing staff
Right.
to be able to do what developed countries have taken 50, 60 years to build for
Right.
their numbers, right? And even they find it challenging, right? For us, we simply have to fall back on technology. of being able to provide access to patients in these locations,
Mhm.
primary healthcare, preventive healthcare. I'll tell you when I used to run an ambulance service. Let me give you an example. This is 2009,
Right.
right? In the Rajasthan operation, where there were about 250 ambulances running, it was not fully covered. The state required something like 600 ambulances. They had only put 250 as phase one.
Right.
Phase two and three had to be done. Within 6 months, you know, they would have about 8 or 900 cases of pregnancies every month in
Right.
the ambulance, which means babies born in the ambulance while you're carting the mother from a home to the hospital,
My God.
right? Rajasthan, 6 months.
Right.
So my Danish colleagues who saw the statistics, they fell off their chair. They said if it happens in Denmark once a year, it makes headlines.
Right.
Ki baby, blah, 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 born in an ambulance, the whole nation
Right.
applauds, claps, how cute, and teddy bears and flowers.
Right.
You know, so that is the gap. Okay, the government subsequently did very well, I must say. They realized that, you know, neonatal and maternal health by itself is a big challenge that
Right.
needs to be addressed sharply and not get lost in the overall emergency care response.
Right.
And you don't need to have a fully loaded ambulance locked taking a patient, a mother, to a hospital when all she needs is a patient transport vehicle, which has
Right.
got basic equipment and a smaller vehicle. So they carved out from this and said we'll have two services.
Uh-huh.
One is just a small basic patient transport vehicle
Right.
whose job is to transport mothers to the nearest medical facility.
Hmm.
And the ambulance should not be disturbed for
Right.
this, right? And then because we are suddenly ambushed with this, oh, this lady is pregnant, she's in labor. What
Right.
can you do? But if with ASHA workers, if the moment there is a pregnancy,
Interesting.
then you can take note, when this lady will need to go to the hospital, it's planned. The patient transport comes, takes you to the hospital, brings you back.
Hmm.
That's how I'm saying the
Interesting.
infrastructure has got to be built around the needs,
Right.
right? So similarly, if the primary healthcare centers, which in India are built but seldom, furnished or staffed in a way that they are of any functional use,
Right.
if these primary healthcare centers are run well with technology, right? The biggest peeve the doctors have, listen, I also have kids. I
Right.
can't go and live in a tier 5 town
Hmm.
to run a primary healthcare center where
Right.
my kid doesn't have access to school. My wife was a school teacher. Where would she teach? Or she
Right.
used to work in a bank. Where would she work? So they also have, so you can't wait for that village or
Hmm.
that block to have a school and a bank worthy of the doctor to go and put. So therefore, the larger ecosystem is so lacking that you can't just helicopter drop in a doctor and hope the doctor to function. He
Right.
cannot function, right?
Right.
So therefore, if you train, you know, the nursing staff and the
Right.
paramedical staff in those medical facilities enough so that with a doctor at the other end of the screen, sitting in a larger center with the reports uploaded, is able to give some medical advice and do triage and say, okay, I will come to that center once a week. I can do
Hmm.
that, right? Then let's segregate those patients and those reports that needs active intervention of a doctor. So every Wednesday I will come and
Interesting.
please schedule these 34 patients who I can then come and see and then or let them go and get these tests done, or in this primary healthcare center or the secondary center. And when I come, I'll see the reports and I will give them one. So therefore, if you do what is called a basic triage,
Right.
and at the primary healthcare center, because there's a technology in place, then I think you will be able to use a doctor more efficiently.
Right.
Your patient medical outcome will not be compromised,
Hmm.
and therefore the whole ecosystem is affordable, it is
Right.
sustainable and scalable. That needs to be done.
Interesting. Because thank you for giving that one out, right? And I completely concur and agree with what you're saying, right? I think there is a lot of this, on the ground mobilization that needs to happen, right? I mean, we have some phenomenal models in ASHA workers, and Angadwadis, right? And in those prenatal care centers that have been established by government across all of these things. And I think they need to be brought in together. I think it's a combination of all of that what we're looking at right now. And they're going to be massive opportunities for startups, right? Whether it be
Yes, massive opportunities for startups. But again, you see, now the issue here is, Anshu, if I can take a moment here,
Sure.
is somehow, the notion has gained ground
Mhm.
that a startup means taking the first step towards becoming a unicorn one day,
Right,
or IPO one day, right?
right,
Now, there is room for entrepreneurship,
right.
for enough local entrepreneurs who can do a startup,
Hmm.
who can be funded,
Right,
who can use technology and broadband and everything else is so cheap and commonly available
right,
that he can take responsibility for 30, 40 clusters, be the technology service provider,
right,
and also provide some other operational help, doctor, staffing, other what you call scheduling,
right.
procurement, and making sure that inventory is properly handled, the schedule of patient appointments, keeping patient record for let's say 10 primary healthcare center at a time.
Right.
That person from a local community, it could be a nurse, it
Absolutely.
could be a paramedical staff with 10 plus experiences come back and wants to now live in his own village and do this, he'll make enough money.
Right.
He's running a business, it's a startup, it's this thing, the other. And Jada Khujli ho rahi hai, then if he's doing very well, then he can acquire three, four such practices
Right.
in the neighborhood where somebody's struggling or not being able to do and go and help him how to do that. And
Right.
over time, maybe running three, four, 500 such centers in a state across three, four districts
Hmm.
and running a full-fledged, very respectable healthcare services company, which then the larger players can come in and aggregate and
Absolutely.
run. So I'm saying,
Right.
so the opportunity for entrepreneurship grounds up
Right.
where the patients are, where the problem is, where the solution has to be developed and delivered and offered is very much there.
Very interesting. Because I completely agree with what you're saying. I think India, we cannot clearly solve with only one kind of entrepreneurship. Something that you kind of
Yeah.
mentioned of, right? I think we're going to need millions of micro entrepreneurs, right? And who can
Yes.
tackle very specific problems and not necessarily dependent on external funding, right? But are running a profitable operation, and can scale as they grow along, right? I think that's something which is the need of the hour, and I think this is something which is being discussed at a policy level. I think across multiple forums. Because unfortunately short on time. How I want these sessions to go on, right? But I think we've covered extensive ground, right, in terms of the possibilities that India offers. The areas which are of critical importance, especially after a post-COVID sort of environment, right? I'd love to, what are the key areas that you are looking at, right? Quick 2 minutes. What are some of those? You highlighted many of them, right? So next 1 year, 1.5 years, right? What are some of the key investments that you would look to make, right? Or what are the sectors that you would, or pockets that you would like to sort of make those investments in? I'd love to understand from you.
So you see, right now, actually, because everything is buzzing,
Right,
there is a real possibility that you could make some serious misjudgments,
right,
you know, because you are at a grand gala party, you're a bachelor, there are 20 pretty women hanging around, you know, you can go and propose to four. One will say yes, but who knows what you have proposed to? Yeah. And vice versa. Women can go to some,
right,
nice. The point I'm making here to bring it back to the focus is that right now the startup ecosystem is on fire,
right,
right? It's on fire because of one principal reason: excessive low cost liquidity flowing from the developed countries,
right,
finding itself investing in a place like India, which a lot of
right,
people say is the last frontier where you can get continental scale growth and exits,
right,
right? So therefore, for them, this is the best arbitrage possible. That
right,
I'm going to get large capital from the cheapest source and
right.
invest it in a market which offers me the biggest scale up opportunity for tomorrow.
Last billion people market, as they're classically calling it.
Yeah, and therefore the opportunity for scale that exists in India potentially
Right,
doesn't exist anywhere else, right?
right,
Now these people are, their cost of capital at base is 1%,
right,
maybe even less than that, right? So they can invest in a company which is, quoting 40 PE, 50 PE, 60
Right.
PE, 80
Right.
PE, right? Whereas people in India, if they're leveraging and investing, or cost of capital is 12 to 10 to 12%, then you have to look at a substantially lower PE. So their risk appetite is much higher than yours. So don't put
Right.
yourself in the same boat as them,
Right.
right? They have taken bets across the world. What they invest in India is a negligible part of their corpus.
Right.
They can lose it, forget it, go back and never talk about it. Right?
Right.
So you have to make bets which are more grounded in
Huh?
realities of
Right.
what India is. So I
Hmm.
don't want to name, but some of these current IPOs that have just have concluded, right?
Right.
Some of them are already showing signs of, troubled economics.
Right.
Others may also start to show this in 2 to 3 quarters if they don't align
Right.
to what is a commonsensical definition of what a business should do with the money that they invest,
Right.
right? So therefore, I think the sectors that I am looking at, I mean, I the ones that are doing, one is SaaS,
Right.
right? One is cybersecurity.
Hmm.
Uh, EdTech, I think the ship has left.
Right.
Food tech, you know, the ship has left. And there are many more ships and boats because
Right.
it's such a staple item. And you can build a good lifestyle business, provided you don't have the notions of building the next unicorn.
Right.
You can get some very good returns, you as an investor, right?
Right.
Because there will be a lot of aggregation and consolidation in that
Right.
sector. Uh, and I would say D2C and social commerce.
Right.
You know, as 500 million people adopt technology,
Hmm.
get used to using their phone for more than just, sending messages and videos and calling.
Right.
Because with UPI,
Hmm.
you know, giving you the confidence that money can be sent and can be received.
Right.
So a lot of people will start buying stuff, but what will they buy? If they will not buy Amazon, they will not
Right.
buy Flipkart, they will not buy any of these things. So this social e-commerce, which is more local,
Hmm.
basic products that you need
Right.
around you and services. So this Bharat that we spoke about earlier,
Right.
I think that has got to be monetized. Again,
Hmm.
low margin, high volume, you know, indigenous languages, local food, local influencers, local touch points, low price points, recurring purchase. I think those are sectors which could see explosive growth tomorrow.
And within healthcare, which pockets would you look at?
See, within healthcare, wherever technology is making a real change
Hmm.
in the patient outcome,
Right.
is it adding to the productivity of the establishment?
Hmm.
But it must translate into better patient outcome
Hmm.
because the ultimate objective of any healthcare intervention is a patient outcome.
Right.
So if use of technology is making it faster, more accurate, more productive, then I think I would look at those areas to invest.
Super. Because my last question, right? I mean, and this is a cliched question, right? But I cannot let you go without asking you this, right? What's that one or two advice, very quick, sharp pointers that you would have for founders, and a piece of advice for people who are, who've been at the fence, right? Looking to invest in startups. Uh, some, you know, say guidance, some sort of an input, right? Because we're a country which is now going through a transition, right? Technology is going to enable a lot of this change, right? We're becoming a homogeneous market, right? I think post COVID, because our reference points have become so much more predictable, right? We're an economy which we can survive an expensive P, right? Because of the visibility that is there in the economy, right? These two things. It'll be lovely to end the session at that.
Okay, so for founders, you know, one, don't get hung up on valuation as a number. Second, don't look for an investor, look for a business partner.
Right.
Three, when you are looking to raise funds, optimize and right size your funding.
Hmm.
More is not necessarily better. You have to be very, very clear as to where you are
Right.
and what is your next inflection point.
Mhm.
And from that inflection point, am I able to give a credible story and look and feel, even if it's a dotted line, to the further next inflection point? Your story is not complete. Because remember, any investor who's buying equity at any stage that is coming into your cap table is coming with the idea of exiting.
Right.
He or she will only get the exit with an oncoming investor in the next round or thereafter, right? So the story must be clear that it's not just to the next inflection point, but the inflection point thereafter is important.
Mhm.
Fourth is that if you are in a B2B business, then please make sure that whatever you are selling, whatever your value proposition is not an absolute.
Mhm.
Your value proposition is actually relative to the ROI that you bring to your customer. If you can define that, if you can measure that, if you can articulate that, if you can deliver it and validate it, then you have a strong business,
Right.
right? And lastly, remain frugal, remain humble. Don't get influenced by what people are telling around you.
Right.
Your best ideas will not come from going to conferences and networking events. Your best ideas will come to you from your customers and consumers. So engage with them, listen to
Right.
them, talk to them, and whichever customer complains, treat him like God, because one complaining customer equal to 50 who did not.
Right.
So therefore, he will tell you what you need to fix. Because if you amplify what is flawed, you will fail. So the people who complain, the customers who complain, are basically your angels and good Samaritans who are helping you to fix what is flawed so you can amplify without a risk.
Super.
Right?
And your input for investors.
Input for angel investors is it's not a weekend thing.
Right.
It's not a thing you can do on the side. You may have beginner's luck, early luck, you may get to that, right? Somebody give you a qualified tip. You work for McKinsey and your classmate from IIT works for Sequoia. He gives you a tip and you put
Right.
money and you get 10x and you say, wow, I think I found the holy grail, right?
Right.
No. Angel investment is a full-time activity, as I found out,
Right.
because pre 2014 and post 2014, I can see the distinct difference between what I do, what I learn, what I
Right.
receive, right? It's a full-time activity. Bulk of the time you will spend what a lot of people consider giving free advice for nothing.
Right.
So if you come from this corporate sort of, hat, here I'm spending so much of time. I'm
Right.
giving my experience, I'm sharing my network. I should be charging him. I should be getting some consultancy fee to get it. It's a place where givers gain.
Right.
You have to give in the hope that you will help co-create value with the
Mhm.
founder, and then you are aligned your incentives that one day you'll receive it together. So
Interesting.
bulk of your time will be spent discovering the deals in which you should or should not invest. And once you have got that deal, in co-creating value with your strategic inputs, network, visibility, and whatever else, and helping find onward investors. And only very limited time is spent, in counting what failed, what didn't fail, what works. So if you're ready with third, because it's a game of risk mitigation, you
Right.
have to go on investing and never stop. Because when you invest, you think this will succeed,
Right.
but you know that from 10 checks that you will cut, six will fail,
Right.
no matter what, right? You don't know which six will fail once you got six, right? It will surprise you what fails, what succeeds, right?
Right.
So therefore, you don't know, because if you stop at 10, all 10 could fail,
Right.
right? So therefore, the head has got to be bigger than the tail. You got
Interesting.
to go on investing, go on investing, go on investing till you die.
Right.
Because the day you stop, then it means that now the risk will overtake you.
Right.
So because the default outcome is a failure. You have to go on investing, hoping that although I've got a few successes in my belt, I'm in search of future successes,
Right.
which will keep coming, but with a failure rate, which can also keep going up. By the way.
Interesting. Interesting.
And don't put more than a certain amount of money, depending upon your risk appetite,
Right.
into this asset class, which it is. It's an asset class. Give it the respect it deserves. Give it the time, and network with people so that you can become sharper in being able to connect the dots
Right.
in domains and jurisdictions that are not your core, because that will what will allow you to invest in sectors beyond your own domain. If you only keep shifting in your own domain, then either you will be sort of investing in the same risk pool, or that domain may not be sunrise anymore.
Interesting. Vikas,
That's what I have to say.
super session. Thank you very much for taking the time out. I couldn't have asked for a better session. Unfortunately, a lot of our conversation was hinged on healthcare, right? Because that's an area which is I have at least known you for that, right? But you've been somebody who's been, has been fairly diversified, right? Who has a view on many other sectors, right? Early part of your career was essentially on consumers, and that's an industry which is going through a huge change. Something that you highlighted towards the end of the conversation as well, right? So D2C is something that I'm personally passionate about, right? I think there are going to be 100,000 businesses, right, and entrepreneurs who are going to come up in the D2C space, right? And that's going to be one sunrise sector that I think each one of us should look for, right? But I'm going to save a lot of that for our next conversation. Hopefully, we're going to have that soon, subject to your availability. But thank you so much for taking the time out. Loved each bit of this session. I'm sure a lot of the way you put it, with the clarity that you put, I think a lot of founders who are going to watch this, and a lot of other people who are looking to potentially invest or are investors, right? I'll give a lot of clarity, right? We'll get a lot of clarity in terms of evaluating themselves in terms of how they are performing, how the path that they've taken, right, and possibly course correct as and when required and where required. Thank you so much for being a part of this, Vikas. Loved every bit of
Pleasure.
it.
Thank you.
And hopefully we catch up soon.
Thank you. All the best.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.